leaving office. He shares his opinions of President Biden's performance and talks about his next moves. Facebook CEO made a statement that it seems his own platform would class as misinformation as Facebook cracks down on posts and users who speak their mind about the CCP virus. Large numbers of military service members are turning down the CCP virus vaccine. The Pentagon says it is not hiding data from the media. And Canada is expected to pass a bill allowing cities to ban handguns. It's part of a sweeping gun reform package expected to have a huge impact on gun rights. Power outages linger for millions of Americans across the country. It's improved a little in Texas, but outages lasting more than 24 hours are forcing people to find their own ways to stay warm. Here's how some are coping.
Another frigid day in Texas, hundreds of thousands still without power trying to stay warm. You see lines for propane in Houston and lines for food in Austin, even though shelves are empty. But Texas isn't without stories of kindness. Jim Mattress Mac McInville turned 2 of his furniture stores in Houston into warming centers. This family came after their trailer lost power.
In the trailer, there's no installation or anything like that, so it's cold over there. Just trying to get them safe, to be honest.
We can't afford to have them freezing, not being able to feed them. So it's a good thing that Mac does this, because, like she said, we would be at home freezing right now.
Mattress Mac says over 300 people slept in his North Houston location Tuesday night, and he expects more to keep coming.
Lots of people coming in as a shelter from the storm. They're at home. They have no power, no lights, no electricity, so it's a disaster as cold as it is. So we're letting people in as a shelter from the storm. That's what we do. We all have a responsibility for the well-being of the community, and we think this is our responsibility.
Governor Greg Abbott says every source of power in the state has been compromised due to systems freezing up or equipment failure, but he says it could have been worse.
What I made clear was the fact that if we relied solely upon green energy, that would be a challenge. But in Texas, we do not rely solely upon green energy. We have access to all sources of energy.
But the American Clean Power Association says it's an extreme weather problem, not a clean power problem. Texas is the only state with its own power grid independent of Washington, D.C. The nonprofit Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, manages the grid. Governor Abbott is calling to investigate the group. ERCOT said it hoped customers would have partial service by later Wednesday or Thursday.
Texas power outages have forced one food blogger from San Antonio to move her ingredients outside, making use of the area's frosty weather to keep food cold.
Cooking by headlamp. This has actually been slow cooking in the Dutch oven all day because, well, we haven't had power to run the slow cooker. So I'm going to shred this and, I don't know, probably a barbecue sauce. I'll have some shredded barbecue or something like that. Sorry about the shadow. It's because I have a headlamp on so I can see what I'm doing while I cook.
Blogger Erin Chase also cooked up her usual food creations a little differently this week. Instead of flipping on the light switch, she cooked by the light of a headlamp thanks to intermittent power outages. Chase told Reuters that her electricity had gone out off and on for around 3 days. Power outages in Texas dropped below 1 million on Thursday morning for the first time in 4 days, but many people remained without electricity or safe drinking water after winter storms wreaked havoc on the state's power grid and utilities. Former President Trump breaks his media silence Wednesday. He comments on his future plans and has some choice words for his successor. Trump tells Newsmax that President Biden was either mentally gone or lying about not having a vaccine when he came into office. Biden made the unusual comment at a town hall earlier in the week. The president got the vaccine himself before taking office. Trump covers a range of topics in his interview with host Greg Kelly. He criticizes Biden's policies on China, Iran, and the U.S. southern border. He also shares some of his future plans. In the interview, Trump praises his late friend Rush Limbaugh. Kelly wonders if Trump could take over Limbaugh's radio show. Trump says he doesn't want to follow Rush, calling him unique. Trump says he won't go back on Twitter, saying it has become boring. He says he's negotiating with people about coming back to social media, and he can get the word out when he wants to. Kelly presses Trump about whether he will run for president again. Trump replies that he has seen polls, and he knows he has tremendous support. He calls his poll numbers through the roof, but says it is too early to decide if he will run in 2024. A new poll reveals that more Republicans now consider former President Trump the best president in U.S. history. Trump beats out Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington to lead the poll. Trump more than triples his results since 2018. The New Economist YouGov survey shows Trump moving from 10 to 36% among Republicans, calling him the best president ever. Reagan now drops to second, going from 36 to 18%. Lincoln and Washington finished third and fourth. In a recent interview, Trump says, "I'm the only guy who gets impeached, and my numbers go up." The poll is the latest data point suggesting Trump remains enormously popular among Republicans. One of Trump's impeachment lawyers is blocked by a law school and a civil rights law group. The attorney says these were two important parts of his life, and he lost them for doing what he thinks is right. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the story.
Attorney David Schoen targeted by cancel culture after defending Trump before the Senate. Schoen was planning to teach a civil rights course at a law school this fall, but the law school says he couldn't do it because of his role in the impeachment trial.
They said, they appreciated my writing, and frankly, it would make some students and faculty uncomfortable, so I couldn't do it.
He says it was sad for him because he enjoys teaching. The attorney was also removed from a civil rights lawyer email discussion list.
They actually spent 48 hours discussing this with their board and so on, and they decided that they needed to suspend me from the list. So I've been suspended from that list, but it's a very important one to me. It's very prominent civil rights lawyers and fine people.
He didn't want to reveal which law school or the name of the civil rights group that have canceled him. Schoen says the trial never should have happened and sticks to his argument that the Democrats' evidence lacked merit. And Schoen says Trump has expressed his gratitude for his defense.
Very, very, very gracious to me at all times, I have to say. In every conversation, I spoke to him 2 or 3 times a day during the trial. Very supportive.
2 of Trump's 3 defense lawyers have faced public pressure since the trial. Attorney Michael Vanderveen's home was vandalized, and he says he's gotten over 100 death threats. He reportedly told Newsmax that now he's moved his children to a secretive location and hired armed guards to protect them. But he says they're doing fine. Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
A Democrat congresswoman calls for the removal of fencing surrounding the U.S. Capitol. She argues authorities can protect the area with more modern solutions. D.C.'s own Eleanor Holmes Norton introduced a new act last week. If adopted, it would ban the installation of permanent fencing on U.S. Capitol grounds. The move responds to the Capitol Police Chief's call for a permanent perimeter fence. Norton told NTD's sister media, The Epoch Times, that the bill also aims to, quote, make sure the nation's capital does not look like an authoritarian regime. Norton's effort joined similar calls from more than 40 Republicans. Earlier this month, they asked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to call for the removal of the barbed wire fence and for sending National Guard troops home. Apparently, a statement that Facebook's CEO made wouldn't have been allowed on his own platform. That's based on leaked footage that shows Mark Zuckerberg raising concerns about virus vaccines changing people's DNA, even though his company doesn't allow content that makes this claim, calling it misinformation.
We have a new Project Veritas drop to show you. It reveals leaked footage of Mark Zuckerberg commenting on the CCP virus vaccines in July. He questions the vaccine safety while assuming they changed the recipient's DNA.
But I do just want to make sure that I share some caution on this because we just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA to directly encode in a person's DNA and RNA, basically the ability to produce those antibodies, and whether that causes other mutations or other risks downstream.
But it seems Zuckerberg's very comment would be censored on his own platform if he were to post that statement today. That's because last week the company issued a new policy on the content related to COVID-19 vaccines. It states the goal of this policy is to combat misinformation about vaccinations and diseases, which, if believed, could result in reduced vaccinations and harm public health and safety. Facebook says its policy is meant to allow people to discuss, debate, and share their personal experiences and opinions. But the tech giant banned claims that say COVID-19 vaccines change people's DNA. That's, of course, after Zuckerberg himself raised those concerns. But then in November, he appears to change his stance as he interviews leading government scientist Dr. Fauci.
And just to clear up one point, my understanding is that these vaccines do not modify your DNA or RNA. So I think that's just an important point to clarify. If I'm getting anything wrong here, of course, correct me. But but just to make that clear.
No. First of all, DNA is inherent in your own nucleus cell. Sticking in anything foreign will ultimately get clear.
Good. Well, I'm glad we can clear that up.
Facebook didn't respond right away to a request for comment.
A former news anchor from Detroit is found dead in her home just one day after she received the CCP virus vaccine. 68-year-old Karen Hudson Samuels also worked as a producer and news director at broadcaster WGPR-TV in Michigan. It's not yet clear what caused her death. Her husband, Cliff Samuels, told CBS Detroit they suspect it may have been a stroke, but adds the normal vaccine side effects may have masked those symptoms. He said he hopes the autopsy report will shed light on what happened. The Pentagon says about 1/3 of U.S. military troops have turned down the vaccine for the CCP virus. The Pentagon emphasizes it's not hiding vaccine refusal data from the public.
The Pentagon says about 1/3 of U.S. military troops have turned down the vaccine for the CCP virus. Major General Jeff Taliaferro of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the acceptance rate varies by group.
We don't precisely know why an individual has not received a vaccine. We think it's important that the department continue to communicate to our service members the value of the vaccine, the safety of the vaccine.
The head of the National Guard Bureau told the panel the acceptance rate for guardsmen hovers around 2/3 to 70%. That's not far off from the number for the military as a whole. The acting defense secretary for Homeland Defense and Global Security told the panel 359,000 service members have received 1 dose, while 147,000 are fully vaccinated with 2 doses. Congressman Mike Rogers told the panel that he doesn't believe the military should wait the 2 years until the vaccine is fully approved before service members and all of the Department of Defense's workforce gets vaccinated.
It's under an emergency use authorization right now. It hasn't achieved final FDA approval, and so there's a real limit legally that we have to make it mandatory for our troops and their families. That's why it's a voluntary basis right now.
Kirby also tried to assure reporters that the Pentagon is not withholding vaccination data.
Homeland Security is finding millions of fake masks. They say the masks pose a threat to frontline workers. Officials say they provide no protection at all.
That includes a seizure earlier today with Special Agents of Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI as it is commonly known, of seizing more than 1 million counterfeit masks as part of an ongoing investigation into a criminal enterprise distributing counterfeit masks throughout the United States.
A CBS report says early investigations reveal China is the source of the fakes. They're made to look like authentic 3M products, but the phony masks are not tested for N95 compliance and could put frontline medical workers at risk. Were sold to hospital medical facilities and government agencies in at least 5 states. Investigators notified about 6,000 potential victims who could have purchased the knockoffs. Officials encourage medical workers and companies to go to 3M's website for tips on how to spot fakes. After Minneapolis residents complained about lacking a police force, the city is apparently refunding their officers. NTD's Christina Kim revisits the idea of cutting down police forces with a criminal justice expert.
After demands from Minneapolis residents, their city council unanimously voted to spend nearly $6.5 million to hire more police officers. Minneapolis residents complained that they were waiting longer to get a response to emergency calls, and violent crime has surged. This is a sharp reversal from just last December, when the Minneapolis Council decided to take $8 million away from the police department after George Floyd's death occurred in the city, sparking unrest and calls to cut police budgets. Heather McDonald, who has written extensively on criminal justice and policing, says this development is perfectly predictable.
The left embraced its conventional narrative that the problem in black communities is the police rather than criminals. The police backed off, and we saw what happened.
She says though the city leaders didn't admit they got it wrong, this move at least implicitly acknowledges the truth.
If you cannot solve crime by reknitting the family, the second best solution to crime is constitutional but assertive, proactive policing.
McDonald says the core root of crime starts at home.
The left will always say poverty or racism or inadequate government funding. I am absolutely convinced that the root cause is the breakdown of the two-parent married family that is at its most catastrophic level in the Black community.
Some studies have shown that growing up in a two-parent household impacts poverty and crime. 3 Minneapolis City Council members proposed replacing the police department with the public safety department that would include law enforcement and other services. Those in support say the police system doesn't work and they need alternative forms like social programs to address the crime rate.
Social services, the government is incapable of acting as a substitute parent, whether it's through a welfare check or through a social worker.
McDonald says it's unclear if more cities will reverse course like Minneapolis because there are many leaders on the left who support defunding the police. But she says we have to push back against the, quote, Black Lives Matter narrative about racist policing. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The ACLU and a host of over 40 groups write to President Biden asking him to block the federal government's use of facial recognition technology. The groups claim the technology threatens privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. The letter says facial recognition technology threatens Americans' core freedoms. It states that the government can use the technology to track everyone who goes to a place of worship or attends a political rally. Some cities and states have placed limits on the technology. The FBI and federal agencies don't currently have restrictions. The coalition claims that errors by facial recognition systems have led to wrongful arrests. The groups asked Biden to take executive action to protect civil liberties. President Biden comes under fire for his latest remarks on China. We speak with a China expert to break down why it's so controversial. NTD's Juliet Song has the story.
In a CNN town hall this Tuesday, President Biden says the U.S. must speak up about human rights abuses in China, but also adds there are different cultural norms countries follow.
I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow.
This comes after the host asked him whether he talked about the Chinese Communist Party or CCP's human rights abuses against Uyghurs with CCP leader Xi Jinping. The U.S. designated the CCP's abuses against the Uyghur Muslim population a genocide. The CCP's abuses include mass detention and forced sterilization. A China affairs expert says President Biden's remarks on different cultural norms echoes Beijing's propaganda. He says the CCP has always been glorifying its human rights abuses.
But in fact, just like the idiom "a wolf in sheep's clothing," the Chinese Communist Party has always been the wolf.
Take the mass detention of Uyghurs, for example. While many in the West call them concentration camps, the CCP calls them education training centers. Party propaganda says the centers help Uyghurs get rid of extremist and terrorist thoughts. But camp survivors describe forced labor and systematic sexual abuses against women in the camps. They say officials there force them to sing songs that praise the CCP and criticize their Muslim belief. Human rights activists say the Chinese regime has been trying to wipe out the Uyghur culture. Measures include forcing Uyghur Muslims to eat pork and drink alcohol and forcing sterilization on Uyghur women in order to limit the size of the ethnic population. Juliet Song, NTD News.
We've been hearing a lot about President Biden's plan to reform gun laws, but it's not just the United States that's expecting these reforms. Our northern neighbor is also going to see more restrictions on gun ownership. NTD's Allison Lee reports.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Parliament is expected to pass sweeping gun reform legislation soon. One of the reforms will allow municipalities to ban handguns. The proposed Bill C-21 would give municipalities the option to pass bylaws that prohibit the storage and transportation of handguns within city boundaries. A breach of these bylaws will lead to a maximum of 2 years in prison and a possible revocation of gun permits. The Prime Minister also announced there will be a buyback program in the upcoming months. Another reform proposal would create red flag and yellow flag laws that make it easier for friends or families to petition courts to immediately remove firearms from a gun owner. Penalties for firearms smuggling will also be increased from 10 to 14 years in prison. These reform measures are believed to be an add-on to the gun ban last year. Trudeau banned 1,500 models of mostly semi-automatic rifles last May by bypassing Parliament. He cited a mass shooting in April as the reason. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
And just ahead, a Cuban American rejects a call from Seattle council members to support communist Cuba. He says promoting Cuban communism is a way to kill society. More on that in just a minute.